The following video is part of the Northern California Training Academy and Casey Family Program's Crisis Communication and Preparation video series. This series is designed to walk child welfare leaders through steps to take in order to be prepared before an incident occurs, including the development of a crisis communication plan, working within a political environment, and creating a narrative that promotes successful solutions that will improve the safety and well-being of children and families in care.
I'm going to tell you about our story in Colorado of our work with our media partners in our child welfare area. And it was quite a journey over the past. November 11th is when the story hit, right? And we spent 9 months before that. I'll get into all of that detail. But I tell you that to say, when you're in the thick of dealing with this, it seems that all you can see is the last bad headline, your frustration because you talked to that reporter 3 times and they still didn't get it the way you wanted it to be, all of the things that didn't go right. And so to have some folks from Casey call us and say, we'd really like you to come to California and talk about your experience. We've been watching you for the past year and we think you've had a marvelous experience of managing the media through this. And we're like, we did? Actually, when you step back, right, and you have an opportunity to analyze the strategy we put in place, how we executed it, those things that are in our control and those things that are out of our control, I think we did have a very positive experience, and certainly a positive experience for the children and families that we serve. But it was helpful for me, and I hope helpful for you. One of the first lessons that I took away was one has to step back when you're in the fire, right, and reflect upon where you want to be and whether or not your efforts are actually getting you there. And I was pleased that Casey asked me to talk about this because it helped Dee and I to step back and reflect. So some of you might be familiar with, this is the Chinese language definition of crisis. It's actually 2 symbols. The first one is danger. The second one is opportunity. You've probably seen that, and the premise being that Chinese symbols tell us that crisis is really an opportunity through danger. And it turns out that some argue that the second symbol isn't actually opportunity, but rather it's more nuanced. According to whosdoll.com, the second symbol is an opportunity. It means an incipient moment, a crucial point, when something begins or changes. He wrote in here, a perilous situation when one should be especially wary is what the true interpretation of the Chinese symbols for crisis is. Whether you see it as danger plus opportunity or we see it as a crucial point, I think that our Chinese brothers and sisters have it right. That when we're confronted by a critical situation like a media story, a media blitz, we have a choice. It is an incipient moment. And we have a choice to perhaps hunker down and throw up the confidentiality shield and talk about how we can't say anything. Or we have some other choices about how we might be able to use that opportunity to better inform a public who we need to help us do our job in child welfare. We have an opportunity to teach people, the public through the media, about what we have the ability to do and what we don't have the ability to do. We have the opportunity to tell them the story of the kids and families that we serve. And it's in that spirit that we attempted to take on the opportunity that was presented to us by our colleagues at the Denver Post and 9 News. So when I came to Colorado, Governor Hickenlooper recruited me, and one of the assignments that he gave me when I first came in January of 2011 was to take a look at our child welfare system. And he wanted us to analyze it from top to bottom and put together a plan that would help us improve the child welfare system. I should tell you, my chief of staff is Roxanne White. Roxanne also is at MSW, and she worked for John Hickenlooper when he was mayor of Denver as his human services director for a period of time before she became his chief of staff in the mayor's office and now the governor's office. I tell you that because it's an entire culture that I have the real privilege of working in about making sure that we take care of those who are struggling and can't get ahead on their own. And so we engaged the Casey Family Programs. came up with a state plan. They had been working county by county. We invited them in, and they accepted and became state partners with us. We also invited in the Annie E. Casey Foundation, who joined with us and helped us in this effort. We engaged 64 counties, all of our partners, to look at the data. We talked to our private providers. We talked with advocates, foster parents, kids in the foster care system, parents that we were serving. We really did a robust analysis throughout 2011 to figure out what we wanted to do to improve our child welfare system. In February of 2012, my boss and I stood at the Kemp Center in Denver and announced a plan that we called Keeping Kids Safe and Families Healthy. 5 elements of the plan. It was a big darn deal. The governor came and he announced this was his plan to help strengthen our child welfare system in Colorado. After that announcement, I had opportunity to speak with some of our friends in the press, and they said they'd like to do some stories on child welfare. Great, what a wonderful opportunity. I said, come on in, let's see if we can't work together. Little did I know what they had in mind. The very next day, we received COORA Request. COORA stands for the Colorado Open Records Act. We received a COORA request for all 64 counties the day after the governor announced his plan. We had for the first time, at least first time in child welfare, 9 News, which is an NBC affiliate that is the one statewide television station for the whole state, and the Denver Post, our largest newspaper, joined together on this investigative query, right? What I didn't know when they asked me if they could do some stories was that they had already been working together and preparing to join forces, and they were already prepared to drop these COORA requests on us. Had no idea at that point. Once we learned this and we had these COORA requests and we had our county partners who appropriately were, holy cow, what's going to happen, what's going on, calling us to see what, we decided we need to put a much more comprehensive plan into action and to be deliberate about this opportunity that we had before us. I think that's important because you may hear a little bit later that our friends at the Post and 9 News went on to talk about how we were resistive, we didn't give them information, and I'll show you how much information we paved the way, unprecedented access to information. And we did that very deliberately, and we did that from the beginning, from this very first day when we got the COORA request to say, okay, let's show them what we have and let's be good partners as best we can. We decided to work with our county partners and that the state would serve as the lead agency, the conduit, so that the media could come through us, through Dee and our communications director. We could sort through, understand what was being requested, and then work with our county partners to get the information in a way that was digestible and useful to our media partners. And again, I want to emphasize, I invited them in and asked them to come and cover the story. We had an opportunity here. So often, right, the public really never knows what we do in child welfare. And they don't understand, we all say we need more resources, we need more staff, we need laws to be changed. The only way that that happens is if it's an informed public. So I knew that there was an opportunity that we wanted to see, so we invited them in. We needed to engage with our county partners and get organized. Now this was really an opportunity for us to teach our county partners as we were learning as well. Many of our colleagues at the counties had done what many, many of us in child welfare tend to do, right? The media calls and we say we can't talk. We go and talk to our local attorneys, our county attorneys, and our county attorney says, oh, you can't say anything. My experience anyway is oftentimes that county attorneys are very, very risk averse to us saying anything. We struggle with the ethics as social workers about what we can and cannot share about our clients and how should we share that. We don't want to expose our clients. We don't want to put their information. It's unethical for us to share that information with the general public. And I think, quite frankly, we as social workers don't get trained on how to interact with the media. It's foreign territory. It's uncomfortable. It's scary. So knowing all of this, we knew that we had some expertise that many of our county partners didn't. Dee is a genius at crisis communications, and we had a good communications director, and we were able to provide support to our county partners, most of which didn't have PIOs or public relations expertise. So what we started to do in February 2012 was to have weekly phone calls so that we could share information with our county partners about what we were hearing, what was being requested, and how we were approaching it, and we could get their ideas and their suggestions about how to provide information and to shape the story. This was really important for us to build trust, to engage our counties, and to make sure we are getting the right information in the right way so it would be useful to our colleagues in the media. Media access. We had 12 Colorado Open Records Act requests, which resulted in 66 individual pieces of information. 247 files or reports were provided, and under the Colorado Open Records Act, we are not required to create reports. We are only required to turn over information. Now, the easy thing would have been for us to do to say, well, we're not going to create that. One of them that came to mind was a request for caseload data. And we at the state, will change, but at the state at the time, we did not gather caseload data. That was the responsibility and is the responsibility of the counties. So it would have been easy to say, well, we don't have that data and turn it away. But rather, we worked with our county partners to say, you know, we got this chance, let's get the data. And we couldn't get it for 64 different ways, so we just went to those 10 large counties I shared with you. And those 10 large counties worked together. We created a spreadsheet about how we were going to gather the data. We pulled it all together, and we created a report, and we turned it over to the media. That's just one report of many things that we created, established at the request of the media. We did all of this, and we didn't charge them anything. We could have. COORA allows us to bill them, and we made a strategic decision that we wanted to show them that we were being transparent, we were being accessible, and we had nothing to hide. And we didn't want to have dollar signs become a barrier to our opportunity to share the story of our kids and our families with the public through the media. We also invited them to join caseworkers and go do ride-alongs. You can't really understand what a caseworker does unless you get into a car and ride with them and know what it's like to knock on the door and have to start that conversation with, hi, I'm here from the county and we received a report that you might be abusing your child. Can I talk to you? You can't understand how much time is spent for a caseworker who has to spend 4 hours sitting in the hallway of a courtroom waiting to get in for the 15-minute hearing with the judge unless you actually are there with the caseworker sitting there for 4 hours, right? I think the ride-along was one of the most powerful tools that we used, and it wasn't easy. This is another area where our county partners were highly skeptical. County attorneys were very resistive to allowing reporters to come into the car. Now, we negotiated with the reporters, you can't use any client information, you can't disclose where you're at, you can't, we put some very distinct parameters about how they could use the information, and they agreed to that. And to their credit, followed those when they had the information and reported it. I really have to thank my friends at Arapahoe County. Arapahoe's just outside of Denver. Aurora is the biggest municipality. They took the risk and said, okay, Bika, we're going to trust you, and put some reporters in cars with caseworkers. And I also applaud those individual caseworkers who took the risk. It was really, really powerful, not only in shaping the story, but it was super powerful to educate the reporters about our system. Telling the story. So we want to not only give them the information they're requesting, but we wanted to use this opportunity to tell them the governor's vision about child welfare, what we're doing and why we're doing it, where we have great opportunities and where we're going to push the pedal, and where we have some challenges, and to help them better understand at all levels our child welfare system and what we're doing to make it better. And also to help them understand, if you only look at one element of our child welfare system, you're going to miss the child welfare system. So their story, you'll see in a few moments, was only looking at child fatalities. We needed them to understand that that's a huge and important piece of what we do keeping kids safe. But if that's all you look at, you've missed what this child welfare system is really about. If all you do is assess the quality of Target, the retail store Target, if all you do is assess the quality of Target by going and analyzing the customer service complaints, you're going to have a totally misread about the Target experience. And the same thing if we only look at child fatalities. So what did we do? We had 18 meetings that included myself, my deputy executive director, all of these people on the list. We had interviews with the governor who sat down. I sat down for two separate interviews with the media. We had our child protection director, or manager, middle manager in our state child welfare agency sit down and do an interview. They went to 14 counties, talked to 9 different county directors, 13 county staff, 6 county commissioners, 20 state staff. And I forgot to mention, when Denver Post and 9 News came together, there were a total of 9 reporters working over 9 months to do this investigative report. I got to introduce you to Jace Larson. Jace is one of the 9 reporters. He was working at 9 News at the time. He recently has left 9 News and is now working at the NBC affiliate in Houston, Texas. Jace agreed to do a couple of minute interview with us to talk about what he thought worked in our efforts to engage with the media. And we thought it might be helpful to hear a reporter's insight.
Hi, my name is Jace Larson. I'm an investigative reporter at the NBC station in Houston. But before I took this job, I worked in Colorado and did a long-form investigation into the Department of Human Services and specifically the child welfare system. And what I want to talk to you about just briefly today is some of the things in our investigation that worked well and how the Department of Human Services was able to facilitate those different things so that it worked out so well. And my hope is that you'll be able to take a couple of things I talk about back to your areas and put them into place the next time you hear that a news station or that a newspaper is doing an investigation into something that you're involved with. One of the things that we did here, and I've got just a few notes, is the Department of Human Services, when they received our request for a lot of information, they were very good about identifying this was a large request, and I think they said to themselves, we need to sit down with these guys and not only give them the information, but help them interpret it, help them understand, not from a biased standpoint, but here's what they're looking at. I know for me as a reporter, that was a nice thing that someone was willing to take the time to make sure that I understood it and make sure that everything was in the right perspective. They also gave us lots of access. Instead of trying to shut us out, they invited us to things that we never knew existed. And it really left an impression on all of us who worked on this investigation that they were wanting to be open and that they were wanting to let us see and experience different things. Lastly, instead of just having us talk to a public information officer, which can be very valuable, they put us in touch with the movers and the shakers, the leaders inside that organization. We got to ask them questions. We got to ask them follow-ups. They sat down for interviews. They let us follow them around. And again, we weren't shut out of stuff. In fact, we were included and brought in. And I think anytime you can do those 3 things, the report that comes out from whatever television station or newspaper that is working on that story will be much more broad. It will encompass more information, and it's really going to help tell your side of the story as well. Lots of times there are confidentiality laws that make that tough, but using some of these things here, I think can help balance that at least to a little degree. I hope that helps.
Jace was fantastic. There were 9 reporters, and one of the things I'll talk about in a few moments was some tensions that developed between 9 News and the Denver Post as they were getting information from us and interpreting it differently. And Jace was one of the reporters who really went into this whole experience with an open mind. I want to learn, I want to be able to understand what the story is, and I want to be able to communicate it effectively. I got to tell you that there were other journalists from our perspective who went in with an agenda, with a perspective, and only wanted to look at the information that justified his or her position. And as these reporters worked together over 9 months, there began to be some tension in these 2 different approaches to telling the story. After the story aired, after the 8 days of stories, they had one of those half-hour programs that they did on 9 News where they had all 9 reporters sit down and talk about their experience and how committed they are to this work and blah, blah, blah. And the whole premise of that interview that they did was to talk about how we wouldn't share any information with them and how hard they had to work to get information. So I had, every time I watch this, I have to giggle to hear Jay say how great it was that we shared all this information with them. Don't tell Jace I said that, Dee. This is Dee's sense of humor, because I don't know that I would call it 9-month labor of love, but it was 9 months from February until October. October, they tell us that they're going to start the series on Sunday, November 11th, and on Friday, November 9th, the promos began with this: Failed to Death, an 8-part investigative series. Now, this was the first thing of this whole thing that really ticked me off. Failed to Death was an unfair, I feel, banner to give this. If you read all of their stories and you watch all of the investigative reports and you take in the entire 8 series, I think they actually did a pretty decent job of balancing this. It's not to say it was a lot of fun, not to say that I agreed with everything, but if you take all of it in over the 8 days, they did a pretty darn good job. Unfortunately, in my view, they went with the sensational headline of Failed to Death. Now, I tell you that to say, that's a piece of this that I can't control. And so sometimes we can try to avoid this. This is going to happen either way, I think, because they got a paper to sell and they got a news program to sell. That's the private market piece of this. So how do we know that this is going to happen and work through it despite that? Well, one of the ways that we decided to do that was to prepare our partners. We kept our partners, and when I say partners, not only our county partners, but our advocacy organizations, the members of the legislature, the governor's office, county commissioners, anybody who was in our sphere and our network. We did our very best to try to keep them informed about what was happening, particularly after we saw where the news was going to go with it, calling it Failed to Death. We were open, honest, and transparent in our communications. We sent out an email from me and a letter to all of the members of the General Assembly, the legislature, explaining what this series was, telling them up front we invited them in, we gave them unprecedented access to information, and we crafted this story from our perspective before the first news article ever hit the newsstands. I think that was really a wise thing for us to do. So our partners could say, okay, something's coming, it's going to be rough, and they had my talking points before the first story ever ran. We also started to plan a response. Okay, so how are we going to do this? We know this is going to be rough. We know they're going for the jugular with Failed to Death. What are we going to do to respond? Again, we never stood back from our commitment of being open and transparent. As a matter of fact, we saw that as being on our side to be as open and transparent, because I believe that if people get the information, they'll be better informed and they'll use good judgment in using that information. So we saw transparency as our friend in all of this. We communicated with our partners. We decided we were not going to go and argue every story, but rather that we were going to hold the reporters accountable to any inaccuracies. And to their credit, we only found 2 inaccuracies in the entire 8-day story. And we took them on and they corrected both of them. We continued, myself and Dee, to be available to anybody who wanted to know what was going on, to be able to answer questions, to be engaged, and to be visible, not to hunker down. And we use social media to our advantage. We have a Facebook page and a Twitter account. We have our own website, and we use that to our advantage. One of the ways that we used it to our advantage was Dee and our communications director chronicled all of the different documents that we created, all of the different interviews. As a matter of fact, they were wise to tape the interviews that I did. And we put all of that information on our website, so that if anybody had a question about something that they saw edited down by our journalist partners, we could say, well, you can go on our website, and we've got the whole thing there. If you only heard a minute of what Director Bika said in his interview, well, you can see the whole 30-minute interview if you go to our website. That was genius on Dee's part. And then November 11th, 2012 came. This was the first headline on that Sunday: cries for help were ignored. What they did was they went back and they looked at child fatalities for the previous 5 years. They chronicled each one of those children's deaths and used that as the premise to why they said that these kids had been failed to death, and used that as the sort of the benchmark of the entire child welfare system in their story. They also did a couple of other things. So Channel 9 created a Child Line 9, they called it. One of the things that we don't have in Colorado is a central number to report child abuse and neglect. It's one of the things we're changing. Instead, we have 64 numbers. And 9 News had an agenda to say what we really need is a statewide hotline. So they partnered with a child care placing agency partner in Denver, had those professional staff come in, and when they would do the stories at night, they'd say, we're creating a Child Line 9. We're doing what the state's not doing, and if you have any questions about child abuse and neglect, you can call our number and talk to these professionals. So over the 8 days, they received about 30 calls, and of those 30 calls, nothing came out of it in terms of child abuse and neglect. Lots of custody issues and a variety of other things, but no child abuse or neglect referrals came out of it. To watch the media responses. So if you go on a newspaper's online site, right, you can see how many people are actually reading the article, and we followed that. And we watched how many people were commenting on those articles and what the comments were about. We were fascinated to find out that there were very, very few comments to the responses. And of the comments that were received, many of them were critical of the media for the way that they were approaching this story. That was interesting because now 9 News and the Denver Post had to adjust their approach, their editorial approach, based upon the feedback they were receiving from their viewers. Dee wanted me to tell you something. I got to remember what it was, Dee. This is the one where, as a comparison, reader comments limited at best, many of those involved in systems. Okay. During the series, the Colorado University fired its football coach. And in a 45-minute period from the time that that story went up, there were more than 1,000 comments on the Denver Post website about firing the head football coach at the University of Colorado. We had a total of how many comments over the 8 days? Less than 200 over the 8-day period of time, just to give you some perspective on volume. This was Monday's headline. System was set up to fail. Now each day, so the 9 News and the Post worked together. So the Post would lead with these stories, and then that evening on the news, 9 News would do about a 3 to 5 minute piece that supported the agenda of the day that was on the Post. Each day during this series, as it rolled out, we in the state continued to work with our partners. We had daily calls to the media to check in. Do they have what they need? We still worked with the media even while we were having the story go out to make sure that they had accurate information and that they were getting their needs met, but also using it appropriately. We had daily calls to our partners to explain what was happening, to answer questions, to see what folks were hearing locally, which may have been different than what we were hearing at the State House in Denver. We had daily contact with key legislators, the chair of the Health and Human Services Committee, the governor's office, and other people to make sure that folks were well informed and understood what was going on. And then, of course, our daily conference calls. We continue on with Tuesday, tragic calls. Wednesdays was law and disorder. This was about law enforcement. Cash divide, they were following funding and how dollars are spent, or in their view, not spent appropriately in the child welfare system. And we started for planning after the series. So what we knew as the series went along is legislators were concerned and wanted action. We need to do something. So we started having behind the scenes some conversations with key legislators, with county commissioners and county directors to say, let's not just do something, let's do what we know needs to be done. And through these conversations, we knew that we needed to, we've known for a long time, we need to revamp the entire front end of Child Protective Services. That has a key link to child fatalities, right? Do we get the right information? Are we assessing safety appropriately and all of that? And so we decided strategically, we're going to put a plan together that's going to revamp the entire front end of CPS. We began developing what became known as Keeping Kids Safe and Families Healthy 2.0. At the end of the series, it was now pretty darn close to Thanksgiving time. And you'll remember that I sent a notice out, a letter out before the series started. We put together a commentary after the series ended and framed it as a Thanksgiving message. And as you can see here, I wrote, "In the spirit of the season of Thanksgiving, I'd like to reflect on those things for which I'm most thankful. Our partners in the county system, applauding them for the work that they do. Governor Hickenlooper's direction, reminding people that the governor actually sent us off on this child welfare journey to improve it before this media story ever hit. Don't forget that we were out first. Previous administrations for their thoughtful leadership." That was another important message. They wanted to look at what this administration was doing, and we needed to remind them that there's actually been years and years of reform in Colorado, and we wanted to recognize those other administrations. The public for their work for kids, and the devoted people across Colorado, including all of our partners for the work that they do. And the stories continued. You can see going on into January. 2012 Fatality Reports leg, that did not make me very happy because that was on us. We weren't getting our state responsibility to review fatalities. We were behind in getting those out. We are not anymore. This just recaps the work that we did behind the scenes to develop that entire, the plan that the governor ended up announcing then in February of 2013, 1 year later from the original announcement, as a plan to revamp our entire front end of our Child Protective Service system. It includes $22 million of new investments. We were very fortunate that the economy in Colorado is recovering at the same time that we needed this plan. So we were able to ask for new mobile technology so that our caseworkers can have iPads and tablets and smartphones to do their work. We were able to make an argument that if you gave us resources, we could do secondary prevention programs for those cases that are appropriately screened out, but that we know somebody still needs some help, and they provided us funding for that. We were authorized to create a statewide child welfare hotline, and we negotiated with our counties that what we'll create is a routing system using the best technology available so that anybody that calls will be routed in, but will still go to the county to report CPS. But through that routing system, we'll be able for the first time to know how many calls are abandoned, how long a call takes. We will record every phone call in a variety of other measures to be able to better manage our that very important function of accepting. And we agreed that we would put in place new standards so that we could standardize the qualifications and the screening process all across Colorado. Here's where we begin to move to recovery. This was the headline on February 7th, the day after Governor Hickenlooper announced keeping kids safe and families healthy. All of the different strategies that were announced. New legislation, that's all the money, but we're not done yet because now we have to implement it. And we were successful in the legislative session. We had bipartisan support on that $22 million of investments, and we were able to take this story, which was embarrassing, to say, no, here are challenges and opportunities to make us better. And we put a plan in place, and we moved it through the legislature. But now my job and our county partners is to make sure we actually execute and fulfill the promise that we laid out as a result of this. We think the way to do that is to keep the media in the loop. The story's now changing, and the media has an interest of following what changes are happening in the child welfare system. And it's given us a new opportunity to continue to tell the story of the reforms that we're putting in place, the progress that we're making, and the impact that it's going to have on kids and families.
Dee, do you want to set us up for this video? And I may need somebody to push a button. Just tell the group what it is and
Sure, this was us bringing in the reporters to talk about some of the changes that we'd made in the system over the last several months. Remember, we didn't get funding to start any of this until July. This ran a couple weeks ago, and this is also the first time that we had one of our most outspoken advocates in the room sitting down with us with the media.
When Denver police took 4 children out of a home recently who they say were nonverbal and living in filth, they highlighted a story that state leaders have been trying to rewrite for months now. Prosecutors have charged Lorinda Bailey and Wayne Sperling with felony child abuse. It turns out the pair had been under the radar of Denver Human Services since at least 2006. 9 News reporter Chris Vanderveen headed to the Colorado Department of Human Services today to get a better idea of what's taking place to try to reverse a trend that we highlighted in our Failed to Death series.
They are the faces of a system that failed to protect the innocent. faces of children who died in a system run by people who should have known better, and they are the faces that have led to change.
We are getting better.
We sat down with 3 people today who are working to improve child welfare in Colorado. Julie Crow with the state, Stephanie Villafuerte with the Rocky Mountain Children's Law Center, and Douglas County Commissioner Jack Hilbert.
I think this is long overdue. I think what this will do, I think is a great step towards protecting our children and making our public more aware of what they can do to get involved.
He's talking of a statewide child abuse hotline that will replace a patchwork and oftentimes inefficient system of 64 county phone lines.
In Colorado, roughly 10% of our calls come from the general public. The majority of our calls come from mandatory reporters.
And that's not good enough, says Crow, who believes the hotline, when in place in 2015, will get the public more involved in reporting child abuse.
Essentially, the public could become eyes and ears for child protection in Colorado.
The state has also created new prevention programs like Safe Care to work with at-risk families, offered more training to call screeners, and required a more public review process of every preventable child death in the state. Yet Villafuerte still takes a cautious approach.
And as long as we continue to expand how we do business and to look for best practices, we're only going to get better. But no, you're never going to have a perfect system when you're dealing with humans.
One obvious question, why take until 2015 to unveil the child abuse hotline? Well, the process of getting it going is complicated, say people who work with the Colorado Department of Human Services. The counties really all have to be on the same page with this, and the training has to be there. They believe that once this gets into place, there will be a much better mechanism of tracking those cases as well, Mark, because they will have one place to go to, one place to analyze as well.
Shakes communities to the core when they discovered that this was going on down the street or across the street or around the corner.
We have been reporting on these problems for years. The hope is we won't have to report on them much longer, but we'll see.
A lot of fixes to come.
Yeah.
All right, Chris, thank you.
I think, Dee, you would agree that you don't want them reporting on it much longer either, but.
We'd be happy with that. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't exactly everything we wanted them to say, but we're headed in the right direction and we're turning it. We're getting them there, and we're going to continue to every time we have a new announcement, every time we have the slightest bit of information, giving it back to them. And just so you know, Channel 9 was the one who hit really hard on us having a hotline. And so we went to them first with this.
So lessons learned very quickly. To recap, I believe that Child Protective Services is not a government responsibility alone. It's a shared responsibility. We need the public to understand us, to help us. We need the public to pick up the phone because they have concerns about their next-door neighbor or their grandchild or their nephew, right? And the only way they're going to do that is if they have confidence in us and can trust us and they know where to go to get us. That's the opportunity that we have here to help them help us in this shared responsibility that we have to keep kids safe. One of the things my boss, Governor Hickenlooper, says very frequently, and I admire so much about him and have learned a lot about him, is lean into conflict. Never let a crisis go to waste is that old sign, right? We've got a captive audience when these stories hit. How do we take advantage of that opportunity to tell our story, to show the public about how they can help us do the work that we need to do for kids? I'm a social worker by training, got a bachelor's and a master's degree in social work. My concentration in graduate school was on child welfare. I know this area pretty darn well. And I have come to believe that transparency in this system is our ally, and that confidentiality, although critically important, is one of our worst enemies in this business. We simply have to find more and better ways to tell the public about what we do and what we can't do, why we do it and why we don't do it. And if we do that, a better informed public will be in a better position to help us help kids be safe. We also need to tell the public this is really, really hard work. This whole thing about Child Protective Services has only been around in our country for, 120 years, something like that? It's a relatively new field when you compare it to things like medicine or the legal field, et cetera. It's pretty new. And we're still evolving. I often use the analogy that Child Protective Services is a whole lot like children's oncology. That even if you have a really good oncologist doing everything exactly right the way that they should, the science is still in its infancy, and children are going to die even when people do things well. that our responsibility in Child Protective Services is A, to make certain that every kid every time has the best social worker with the right resources, well-trained to carry out their work. But it's also to continuously learn and evolve our approaches to better keep kids safe and families healthy. It's also necessary to hold the media accountable for accuracies and for fairness. They have a responsibility to the public as well, and there are times that we got to call and say that's across the line, and that's okay to do. Advocate for the work that we do. Keep your friends close and your advocates closer. As you can see through our story, we worked really hard to make sure that our partners understood what we were doing. Didn't matter if they agreed with us necessarily. They needed to know what we were thinking and why we were doing it. And ultimately, this whole thing about child welfare, it's not about you and me. It's not about our systems or our elected officials. It's not about the media. It's about our kids and their families. They're depending upon us. And as hard as it is to have my name splashed across, and we deleted a whole lot of things for sake of time, but the photos that have me looking anguished because I was rubbing my brow and they took a shot, so they use that as an anguish shot, or headlines about Bika's losing this or whatever. Personally, it can be really discouraging. But I also have to remember I got to step back and say this isn't about me. Because this opportunity, this Failed to Death series, it resulted in $22 million, new laws, greater transparency, a new hotline, new qualifications, new technologies, all things that I knew and our county partners knew that we needed that we never would have gotten had we not had the attention and the public's interest through this Failed to Death series. Thank you.